Hello, everybody. Welcome to and another thing with Jim. Mid to late Advent edition. I am coming at you from our guest room once again, but I assure you I have not been evicted from my own house. Pat, are you still at home? How are you doing?
I'm still at home, and this is not seasonal green. This is Eagles green because they won a football game against a really horrible team, unfortunately. So
Yes.
it didn't really indicate anything moving forward, unfortunately. But a win is a win is a win, even if it's versus a 2-11 squad. So Eagles green today.
Very nice. And with that, for those that are not watching on YouTube, that is basically Kelly Green, right? As
Yeah,
opposed to any Eagles green. Yeah.
yeah.
So, Pat, do you know the derivation of why Kelly Green is called Kelly Green? Was it a Mr. or Miss Keller?
No, I really have no
Kelly,
idea. I,
Tim Keller, Keller Green.
I don't think so. I don't think that's the reason. Would certainly be interesting, but
Okay.
I would not guess that.
Uh, if we have any listeners out there that know where Kelly Green comes from, the derivation, we would be interested to know. And another Jim at gmail.com. So, Pat, we are coming from a meeting to a meeting with you all. Shall we get to word and then world?
Yep, let's do it.
Okay. Pat, how many sermons in your life have you heard from John 3:16? Have you actually heard a lot of them? Or is it, oh, that's a pretty common verse, but maybe not so much have I heard sermons from it, which is what I preached from this past Sunday for people who weren't there.
I would say maybe the latter. Maybe,
Huh.
yeah, maybe people thought it's too like overdone or,
Hmm.
yeah, so maybe people kind of like collective pastors don't kind of jump in there because maybe they're nervous about tackling it or maybe they think, oh, what else is there to say? I mean, which
Right.
I don't think they're probably thinking that, but yeah. So I'd say maybe it's something that's, you don't really hear too frequently, personally.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I can remember in early days of Liberty Collingswood making this joke. My first encounter with John 3:16, speaking of football, was in the 80s watching football games when people would have John 3:16 in the stands. And this was before I really knew anything about the Bible. I do remember, and this is analog days, seeing the signs for John 3:16, asking my parents, what does John 3:16 mean? And they say, well, I think that's a Bible verse. And so I would track down a Bible in my house and I read John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. I remember thinking, this has nothing to do with football. I don't understand.
Yeah, there's no like
And
anything related, right? I mean, there's no,
right.
yeah,
No.
it's not about like the strength or, the
Yeah.
strength of God or,
Wings of eagles.
yeah,
Right.
right.
Yeah.
Strange.
So but I see the rationale. They just want people to know Jesus' love, and that's something being watched by hundreds of millions of people or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's
But
great.
still, there was a context question I had. Hopefully people were not questioning why I was preaching on John 3:16 this past Sunday, because love, for God so loved the world, is one of the four themes of the Advent season that we're going through. And Pat, for this word section, just want to take a couple of minutes to go back to this idea. And I did spend a little bit of time contrasting what I see as some biblical underpinnings of its definition of love versus how love is used in just a more broad context in this cultural moment. One of the things that I think makes Christian love distinctive is that love is about the other and not about ourselves. Thinking and looking for the song title, if it was out there, I'm in love with love, and finding multiple songs that have the title I'm in love with love. And the idea behind that, and I don't want to be too crass just copy and pasting, well, because it's a song title, it must be something endemic to culture. But I think there's some sort of connection there where how we tend to think about love is just very much the feeling that I receive from being in love. And it tends to be less other focused and sometimes intentionally, other times through no specific malicious intent, it can still end up our love becoming pretty self-focused. What do you think, self-love versus other love when it comes to love?
Yeah, I think of like Will Ferrell from Elf where he's like,
Hmm.
say, I'm in love, in love. Like, I don't know if I care if anyone knows it, like, kind of like that. Like, it reminds me, like, I'm in
That's
love with
good.
love, which is very almost like so frivolous and silly. And I'm also, I watch The Bachelor television show. Probably shouldn't admit that on air, but I do. It's my only reality TV show I watch.
Interesting. I
But
don't think I knew that. Huh.
and probably like the silliest thing
Pat
there is
Bachelor.
like, yeah, the silliest thing in there is like, when they say, like, do you actually love somebody? And that's the big thing is when you say that you love them, that's like the deal breaker. That brings you into a whole another echelon of like feelings and like, it's very serious and
Interesting.
as if like that conveys some magical power, like, that you say you're in love with somebody. So yeah, I think our society, like, love is pretty like definitely self-centered in how it makes you feel, and none of like the tough or like the serious things or like the totality of what love really is, like a biblical love. It's
Yeah,
certainly, in our society, it's been devalued and kind of just some, punching line.
I think that's true. And we'll see if the movie Elf comes up in any other podcasts that we drop this week. And one thing that I'll confess, if such a podcast comes down the line, the Pat, I've never seen Elf. I I missed it. It was a phase of life where it came out when I was in college, and I just sort of missed a lot of pop culture in college and never went back to it. And so, if Will Ferrell in that movie saying "I'm in love with love," that would have been a great pull for my
Well,
sermon.
he
But
doesn't say exactly that, but that's what it made me think of. He says like a derivation of that kind of.
okay,
But
I'm
a
intrigued.
quick aside there, I saw that when I was 18 with my friends, and like me and my friends
Uh,
like listened to like punk and hardcore music and stuff, and
right.
really no one really liked it. I really liked it at the time, but now 20 years later, everyone's like grown up, and now it's like, well, yeah, it's a good movie. It's like, no, you didn't like it back in the day. You were too cool for it, but I've been there being not cool for 20 some years now.
Okay. Long time Elf fan. A couple more thoughts in this direction. I mentioned too, and I don't know, like has Lizzie McAlpine come across your Spotify listen or radar?
I had to look her up after the sermon, and it looks like
Sure.
she's like a pretty like solid, like, legit good artist, but I just never encountered any music before.
Yeah, so she's sort of the go from Taylor Swift to some like half a generation younger to like a Phoebe Bridgers to like a Gracie Abrams
Hmm.
to Lizzie McAlpine. And I'm even able to describe that musical family tree because I have two high school daughters that keep me in the loop with such things. But I really do like her music. I think she is the real thing when it comes to singer-songwriting. The song Drunk Loving, or sorry, Drunk Running, which relates to the question of love, where there's this friend that is an alcoholic, but nobody is actually telling him that he needs to stop drinking. And so that's the modern conundrum of loving people, but wanting them to be completely self-determinative and make their own choices. One connection that I thought of after the sermon was if love is more, at least by default, about self than the other, it's easy for us to be backed into a corner of being stuck between I love you and I need to let you be you, which is a bridge that's crossed more easily if love truly is about the other person. So if we have a loved one who struggles with an addiction, it's not contradictory to try to help them to stop saying yes to those addictive impulses because love is truly for them and for their good. So love brings together and crosses some of that divide. And then the other part is simply that, again, taking love out of subjective feeling territory. I love whom? And love demands an object. If God so loved the world that he gave his only son that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life, I need to not just pat myself on the back about being a loving person without thinking about how am I practicing love with actual people, whether it's Emily or my own family or my neighbors or others. Whom am I loving is an essential next step sort of question. So love needing affection, but then also object and action if it's really going to be love. What do you think?
Yeah, so, and I kind of hesitate to like relate this or even talk about this, but like the famous director Rob Reiner,
Okay.
his yeah, it's I'm gonna land the plane maybe. here. But that was like
Pat, we got so much hate mail about Paul Dano that now we're going into the Rhinoverse. I'm
so
I'm kidding
yeah,
about the hate mail for Dano, but yeah,
yeah.
go on.
So, obviously, like, the fact that he was like killed, and
Yeah,
it appears, allegedly, that it was his son,
yeah.
who, who killed him and his wife.
Hmm.
And I'm sure maybe you've seen, or maybe you haven't seen, like the numerous interviews with him or the film they did together, and they kind of like talked about that. And
A little bit, yeah.
yeah, and it was kind of one of those things, and again, maybe this isn't quite there, but the loving at a cost, the speaking the truth, like it does have risks. It does have, some, you know, he spoke hard truths to his son. He loved him, but he also kind of, um, I don't know. He tried to kind of like he loved him by like holding him accountable, but also like helping him in numerous ways. And
Hmm.
again, I'm not saying that that's like, something you would expect to have happen, to someone you really loved and cared about, but he did love him. He spoke hard truths to his son, and and yeah, and sometimes like love can come at a cost, and love
Hmm.
isn't something that's you know, if it's true love, if it's love without a cost, then what is it? Like there's no
Yeah.
then is it really love, or is it kind of just like this easy thing that you kind of just like grab onto that makes you feel good, and you can kind of go through life and like all those fuzzy feelings. But if it's love, then it does have a cost, and it does have, tough things to go through. So I just kind of like think of him and what he must have gone through with his son over like those decades of helping him, and you
Yeah.
pay for his rehab 18 times and like all this stuff, but also, had to draw the line at some points in time. And so like, I was just kind of like reading a lot about that, and it was just kind of, man, he really did love his son, but
Hmm.
love's no guarantee of a happy outcome. In some ways. As far as that goes. But yeah, that was kind of something that kind of, I'm not sure if it relates in any way, but it's on my mind, and I was like, kind of been thinking
Yeah.
about it. So it's so sad about the whole thing. I mean, it's so tragic. So and some of this love thing got me thinking about like tough love, like you said, and kind of holding people accountable when need be. Yeah,
I think those are wise thoughts, Pat. And so I did use the language on Sunday of love coming, carrying a cost related to that. Love carries some risk, and this is not to sensationalize
sure.
what happened
Yeah,
to the Reiners, but even thinking more or less about the end of the Reiner life, but more just decades long serving a son with an addiction. The part of loving for the sake of the other is a renunciation of control. And for me to compel a specific outcome in any love relationship means that I would have to cut myself off from the other person to self-protect. And real love means that if I'm truly serving the other and consider Philippians 2, consider others more highly than yourselves, there's there's a freedom in actually giving up freedom for the sake of love and renouncing some control because you're loving somebody else for their own sake. And there's a there's a specific beauty in that, but it's not risk-free at the same time. And what we gain from a process like that, I think, is more than what we might lose. And the reality is too, if my goal in love is simply at the end of the day self-protection or preservation of a set of warm fuzzy feelings, it's going to give diminishing returns because it's so self-centered that yeah, it's I loving myself is not a renewable resource. I need to love other people and receive God's love too. So yeah, all of that makes sense to me.
all right.
What a
Um,
crazy weekend
yes.
again.
Yes, true. So why don't we move to world, and you
Hmm.
can drop that little disclaimer. I think this is one I would say probably like a 6.5 level disclaimer is needed out of 10 today. Maybe a little bit higher than some other times, less than others.
We'll see, but I think you're probably right. So when we talk about world, I just take a look at a topic day of and put it on a back burner thought for a couple of hours and just a minute or two jotting down on my Supernote Manta, and then we're going live. And so to be able to apply what I hope is biblical wisdom in virtual real time means that we ask people to take some of these conclusions less as definitive, but more as tentative towards trying to find solidity in a world that's always changing. So I think what I'm about to say is true, but we always reserve the right, pending further discussion, to revise down the road, especially with a topic like today, which is
So my favorite movie of the year is a movie called Eddington, and it's set during the height of the pandemic, um,
right.
back in 2020, and it kind of got me thinking, um, have we as a society learned any lessons from COVID-19, from like the height of the pandemic? And um, are things so decisive now that, God forbid, another pandemic or something like a bird flu happened, which could potentially be like much more deadly? Are
Hmm.
we in any position to kind of like learn from our, either mistakes and successes, or are you a little bit more pessimistic that as society is like ruptured a bit more, that, maybe are less, we would have less ability to kind of like do anything really about it at all. So, yeah, what are your thoughts?
I'm mostly more pessimistic.
Okay.
But to to begin the segment with a note of levity, Pat, are you young enough or old enough, I guess, to remember the Dana Carvey, George H.W. Bush impressions from the early 90s?
Yeah, they're great.
Okay. So one of the bits as Dana Carvey on Saturday Night Live was doing a George Bush. So the oh man, I forget the exact context, but in the 1992 presidential election, Bush was criticized as he was running for wavering on the Vietnam War back in the 60s and 70s when he was a younger politician. And the Dana Carvey as George Bush says in the present day of 1992, we have learned a very valuable lesson from Vietnam, and that is don't go into Vietnam. And that was it. Oh wait, no. So the context was uh, 1990s interventionism, and was Bush somebody who's interested in intervening in all these places, but it would be an endless set of skirmishes like Vietnam. And have we learned anything? And Bush said, "We learned just don't go to Vietnam." So
That was a
the
pretty decent impression, I will say.
there we go. I spent a lot of time
I
workshopping that
can
in high
tell.
school. The the early 90s SNL was probably the main point of conversation with myself and my friends back in the day. So, have we learned any lessons from pandemic? Yes, don't have pandemics because they're going to destroy us. A few different ideas here. One, I think we're relatively lucky, which I use with sober quotation marks for lucky, that the pandemic virus itself was as relatively benign as it was, which is not to say that there weren't horrible deaths. And my mom died of COVID, or she was struggling with a lot of health things. So I don't say that or lightly or flippantly, but COVID would have been that much worse if it was highly contagious, but not super, super, super lethal at the end of the day. And if we have any sense about us, we'll learn the right lessons from this pandemic if and when a worse viral strain, or if we're the Last of Us fungal infection it comes our way. And I'll say this is why I'm pessimistic, because I don't see a lot of growth happening along these couple of trajectories. But to me, I think for me to become more optimistic, there are a couple specific conversations that I think we need to have as far as public discourse that in some ways can sidestep, I hope, some of the trite political divides that we're finding ourselves in, because I think they're relevant questions. And sometimes with with heated arguments politically, or maybe more than that. I feel like what people are arguing about are surface issues when there can actually be more, when they're missing the point of what they should actually be talking about in different ways. But here are a couple that I think are going to be relevant in an ongoing way. One is, how do we balance public safety with public freedom? And that's a perennial issue, not just a recent pandemic influenced one. 20 years ago in with 25 years ago with 9/11, the Patriot Act was, this is George W. Bush, so HW's son, was hugely controversial when the government began more types of surveillance without consent, higher levels of profiling, etc. And there were some people that were really on board with it, other people were not. But the question there is, what is a valid ceding of some public freedoms and, one would say, civil rights for the sake of public safety? The complicated thing is, nobody, well, relatively nobody is on one full extreme or the other. So
Sure.
relatively few people would say we need maximum public freedom, no hindrances to our self-determination at all, public safety be totally damned. Or, relatively speaking, there are a few people that would say we need to be absolutely on top of public health and safety. So everything, all restrictions in every potential way need to be turned up to the maximum. The great majority of us are in between, and we need to be able to manage those levels. And at least in my mind, if we can have some of these conversations that are not in the heat of the moment, we'll be able to have better understanding next time the heat in the moment is turned up once again. So I don't think we have a clear understanding of how to balance safety and freedom. And as long as we don't, we're going to run up to the same sorts of issues once again.
Okay. All right. So mostly pessimistic take. Um, I think
Yes.
I think I agree with that. It seems like there's no like effective ruling body that has like respect or is kind of, people are willing to follow. There's no consensus on science or really anything right now. So I'm pessimistic in that way. I'll throw a couple optimistic takes or like lessons. One is
Okay.
we can do pretty amazing things. I think most people, I think there's again on every aspect of COVID, there's going to be people who say like this isn't true or like this is wrong or this is fake news
Yeah.
or is whatever's
Hmm.
happened, and on both sides.
Yep.
There's crazies on both sides. I will say that the far of both has some crazies
Sure.
in my opinion. Um, but we did some amazing things, like the vaccine, which I think saved a lot of
Yeah.
lives. Like, was kind of like almost unheard of the way it was developed and put through and kind of like dispersed amongst the population. And again, I think that saves lives. So I think that was pretty awesome. So I think like we can, when we're up against the wall, do some pretty like amazing things.
Yeah.
Um, and then also, people did sacrifice. Like, people did show they were willing. Maybe it didn't last incredibly
Hmm.
long, but people were, at least especially in the early days, willing to sacrifice some freedoms for like the greater good or for like the
Yeah.
potential like elderly neighbor or something or like the potential that would
Hmm.
happen. So I think there are some good things there. I think that
Hmm.
the scariest thing is that I think as a society we'll come together if the next pandemic is really deadly. Like sadly, I think as you
Hmm.
slide the scale to like more infectious and more deadly,
Yeah.
the more people who, I guess obviously there's common sense, but like the more people and the more like children who are like, could potentially
Yeah.
die or do, then people are probably going to say, okay, we need to like, I'm willing to go forgo some freedoms if 1% of like kids under 18 are dying or something, something like that. So that's kind of the sobering thing for me is that, we won't take it serious until it's
Hmm.
so bad that we have to take it serious. And then yeah. So that's probably my end and on a pessimistic note there.
I appreciate those thoughts, and I'll come back with two different things. One of them is, I see the logic of your supposing that if there is a really deadly pandemic, there will be more of a broad consensus that we need to circumscribe some freedoms for the sake of public safety. I'm I'm less sure about that, and I
Okay.
can talk more about that in a moment, but I think a more likely version of that similar hope, and I mean, I hope that I'm wrong in saying that I'm pessimistic about what you just said, Pat. But a different variation that I think might be slightly more likely is I think there will be a broader consensus next time that would hold that we should restrict public freedoms in order to contain a pandemic at an early stage.
Mm.
And, there's a lot of different countries around the world, so this is not necessarily true of every nation in the world. But I think even to use China as an example, whether through internal self-reflection or international pressure, I would guess that who knows, but if a potential pandemic outbreak would begin in China again, that there would be more of an effort by the Chinese government to localize it and
Yeah.
not let it spread
Yeah.
through altruistic motives on their part or otherwise. But then more generally, having seen how disruptive a pandemic globally truly is, I think hopefully we'll be quicker on the uptake if it looks like there's something going on to lock down a smaller
Hmm.
area sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
And those same questions, those same tensions are going to be there, public safety versus public freedom. I think there's going to be more widespread willingness to restrict freedoms for a smaller area or subset of people for the larger cause of making sure that this doesn't become a pandemic. And so pandemic threats will continue to be there, but possibly we've gained wisdom about nipping it in the bud faster based on this experience. Any
Yeah, no, that's a
thought?
good point. I think people would still have an appetite. Even people who are so very far on the freedom at all costs is like, all
Yeah,
right, if I can trust or, reasonably trust that, if we can kind of hold tight for a week or two, I mean, again, that's
yeah,
kind of what the last time it happened. And then, I think some people feel like they got the rug pulled out from under them. Whether that's true or not, I think some people
hmm
probably perceive the way that it happened that way. But yeah, I think people would, be like, all right, let's see if we can just really knock this out for the next couple weeks so we don't have to like have it linger for years. So
yeah,
I would tend to agree with that. Yeah.
yeah. And this is science fiction and pretty dark. I would say that public tolerance could be even greater than that. So if there is clarity that there is something deadly going on in an American city, I think there could be public willingness to lock down a whole, even a large city for a month or two, even. So even more than a couple. Or let's treat Philadelphia. I mean, we're in South Jersey, so we'll be fine. But um, if there's a truly pandemic going on in Philly, it would be horrible if Philly would be on lockdown or quarantine for a month or two, right or wrong. But I think the rest of the country would be willing to let that happen if there is a perceivable threat, or at least more willing than before COVID-19. And then my other thought relates to, or this is going to both what you were saying, and it was going to be my second question. How do we promote public health when trust in public institutions are so low? And to me, that's an insoluble conundrum right now, where whether or not the next pandemic threat occurs under a Republican or a Democrat administration, a large percentage of Americans are not going to trust anything that comes out of that government, period. And even different arms. So maybe you trust the president, but you don't trust the CDC. Maybe you hate the president but love the Supreme Court. Maybe there's going to be enough overall. We don't trust experts or institutions and whether it's health or government, I just have trouble seeing how if there is any restriction to come down the pike, it's going to be a function less of public consensus and more simply exercise of power,
Yeah.
which will ultimately come with a set of downsides. Maybe necessary power based on whatever threat of pandemic, but one of my main reasons for pessimism is there is so much distrust of institutions that some sort of broad-based acclamation for any institutional response to a pandemic threat occurring. I think those chances are very low.
Yeah, that's that. Yeah. And I think the last thought from me is I agree with that. I think the last thought from me is like, let's just maybe pour more money into doing all we can to ensure there's no pandemic that can happen. So, sciences and, kind of just tracking and all that stuff, which I
Yeah.
can't speak to the right levels of funding for that. But I think,
Hmm.
the best way to kind of like not have to deal with this is just like don't let a pandemic get started or,
Yeah,
nip it in the bud right away. But
I
yeah,
think that's true.
yeah,
One final silver lining for me, one thing that we did learn during pandemic is that human contact is essential and not
true.
optional
Yeah,
for people. So socialization levels with children, education lags and gaps, loss of economic opportunities as well, or just loneliness, mental health, all that stuff. If those negatives all skyrocketed during pandemic, we realized that, and this also relates to the equation of freedom versus public safety. Lockdown does come with costs because human contact is limited. That's both in general human contact and then specifically in person
yeah,
contact, where justified or not,
Papa,
if I am restricted from being with other
what
people,
is like what? Where's Malcolm?
the
hold on. I mean,
Malcolm, come home.
there's some human contact going on.
that's
So
right.
sometimes it's Pat Parent over over there. Pat, I can blab if you need to take a second to
No, I just heard from my one of the mongrels in the family that
okay.
that
He,
one child is being mean to the other child.
oh man. Okay, Pat needs to go do some Pat refereeing right now. So I can wrap this up fast. The both general human contact and in-person contact. The general human contact, I mentioned that because I think when pandemic occurred, even though we had capacity to be in text message, phone contact, Zoom contact with people, as lockdown here in the Northeast went on, we availed ourselves less and less of that technology, and we saw that it was a poor substitute for in-person hanging out, such that yeah, there is something, and yes, there are always going to be health risks with being in person, but there is something invaluable with that. I don't think. Do you remember the Zoom happy hours? That
Yes. Yes.
the we people were game, whether it was your business, Liberty Collingswood. I think we, whether it was through our small groups or whole church, we sponsored a couple Zoom
Yeah.
happy hours or here's tea and coffee things, and we tried to make the best of it, but it was all just kind of lame. And yeah, so as human beings, and this is the image of God, once again, the it's not good for human beings. It's not good for man to be alone, and we found that out the hard way during pandemic.
Yeah, no, that is true. Let's get to wild card real quick here
Wild
at the end
card.
here.
Yes.
And it's a pretty simple one, I'll say. So what are in the spirit of it being the holidays,
Hmm.
What is your most underrated and overrated holiday? If you'd like, I'll start. If you want a minute to kind of just think about, well, what are the holidays? Okay, these are the holidays. Which ones are underrated and overrated currently? Um, so if you want me to start, I will. But if you're ready to go and take a crack at it, then go for it.
I'll make a go of it.
All right.
The I'll give you start with two underrated.
Okay.
One, and maybe this is a zag, Christmas is underrated. I
Okay.
think it's easy enough to say, oh, Christmas, it's such a trite holiday. Why do we have to go in for the Disney World of holidays when there are so many other options? Christmas really is awesome. So let's not give Christmas short shrift. And this is less about should Christmas marketing start on November 1st versus December 1st. But the holiday itself is awesome. This is true of, or I think both within Christianity and the church and outside. There's no other, so within the church first, there's no other Christian holiday that so aligns with public consensus and rhythms as Christmas. Like I love Easter, but Easter, it's pros and cons. It has some benefits to it as far as this really is something that's not celebrated, at least here in the Northeast, that much outside of the church, so it's our own thing. But the flip side is it's not like Easter is on everybody's hearts and minds and lips for a month or two ahead of time. People aren't given weeks off of work on either side of the Easter holiday to be able to celebrate and focus on Easter. Family isn't traveling in from all over the world to be with one another
True.
on Easter, but all of those things are happening during Christmas. And for all the consumerism that people can complain about on Christmas, I would guess that more money is raised for things and more charitable donations occur in December also. So there is more consumerism, but there's also a lot more generosity too. Let's say Christmas is underrated, and also let's say Mardi Gras is underrated because it's only celebrated here in the US, in New Orleans, and we were right and they were wrong. So, Pat, I'll come back to my overrated, but do you want to give me your underrated one first?
Yeah, and I agree that Christmas, I love Christmas just so much. So
Yeah.
it could be underrated. It's great. I'm going to say
Hmm.
Halloween is underrated, and I'm worried that you're going to say it's your overrated holiday. But um, Halloween is cool because it's very like community focused. So
Hmm.
um, it's by its nature, everyone is out and about. So
Yeah.
I like that you're involving the community.
Hmm.
It's fun for everybody. So you can be young and be trick-or-treating, or you can be someone who's maybe not young, but you're at your house, but you can still get into it by decorating your house, by interacting with, your neighbors, kids in your community, maybe dressing up, maybe not, whatever. So I think in that
Hmm.
way, it's kind of like unique and bizarre, the fact that like people like walk around in costumes and like ask strangers for candy. That's
Yeah.
strange and bizarre, which I think is cool. And then you get to be creative. So kids get to be creative and kind of have costumes. So I'm gonna say Halloween is underrated. So we can go on to your overrated and see if Halloween is in fact your overrated. But yeah, so what do you have for overrated?
Overrated Christmas.
Should have seen it
Where,
coming.
where, come on. It's so consumeristic, Pat. And when family gets together, they hate each other anyway. And all you're thinking about is being done with it. But then on the other hand, once you get to January 10th, 15th, 20th, and you're looking at a lot more weeks of winter with no reprieve and nothing to look forward to, maybe you go back to thinking Christmas is underrated after all.
I like what you did there. So I'll give you my quick overrated is Labor Day. Labor Day is overrated.
Oh,
Um, for one, it's the end of summer, so it's kind of just a little bit depressing. It's not like
yeah,
Memorial Day where,
that's good.
yeah, and like Memorial Day is like, and again, like there's serious aspects of Memorial Day, obviously, but as far as like a holiday that you get off, it's like you're entering the summer. There's hope. Labor Day is just, just the last day kind of before everything revs up and you have responsibilities again in some ways. It's also antiquated, like labor versus capital. I don't think that's something that's really on the hearts and minds of people. I don't think, really it's, broken up into like, well, I'm part
Fair.
of the labor class and I'm capital. I think that's also a little bit antiquated. And then not everybody gets off. So there's people still working on Labor Day. So yeah, I think I
Yep.
think I think Labor Day is overrated in my book.
I like that. Pat, once we get off, I'll text you some of the thoughts in my head about what to list as underrated, overrated holidays, but I decided not to for prudential reasons.
Fair enough.
But yeah, I think that's true. So what can I add to the holiday panoply that we have solved just then and there?
Yeah, nothing.
Okay. Well, hey everybody, it's been a fun, what a great fall, Pat. One of the joys of my fall has been recording these episodes with you, a new format for and another thing with Jim. So thank you for giving of your not unlimited work hours here at Liberty Collingswood to recording and also processing and producing these podcasts. This feed, this is it for 2025, but we'll be back in 2026. So we're not going to have time to record an episode next week for Christmas Eve, then a little bit of a long winter's nap. I think it is January 7th when another thing with Jim will drop in the 2026 edition. It's been a great 2025. Here we go to an underrated and overrated holiday. Bye, everybody. Bye, Pat. Anything
2026.
else?
Nope. See you next year.
Sticking the landing.